Hey guys, VT here with a brand new series all about my favourite decks where we're going character to character each episode, starting off with Spider-Man, the original character from the core box, the character most people played first, not me, my friend introduced me to Black Panther, and he's really interesting. He is flawed, but his imperfections lead to really interesting challenges in deck building and gameplay that are fun to kind of work around, that actually leave me really liking Peter Parker, Spider-Man. So these decks I'm going to be talking about aren't the strongest decks I can make. I'm not just saying these are the most powerful decks, because these are the decks I find the most fun. My favorite decks are the decks I enjoy the most. That is why I play the game at the end of the day. And yes, I do think there's pretty strong decks overall, but they are not. I could really push that power level up. I could go for some pretty nasty strategies, and it would be stronger, but it would leave less room for creativity. We could have more allies, we could have more recursion, things like that are typically very strong, but not today. This is not the purpose of this video or these decks. Though again, you can take them on expert mode against almost every villain. Maybe dodge the top 3 or 4 hardest, but even then, you can take these against the vast majority of expert villains and expect to succeed with the proper play pretty much every time. At least that's my opinion. So we'll have a lightning quick look through his strengths and weaknesses. We'll talk very quickly about the web warriors and how they work, because a couple of these decks are going to be using them, and then we'll get into it. So damage. Actually pretty good on the villain, not very good at mid-range. He can get overrun by minions very easily, especially because although he has a 2 attack stat, he does like to defend with his 3 defense. Threat removal, still some of the worst in the game, and we now have 50 characters. He's like bottom 3 easily. Some would say bottom 1, honestly. It's pretty rough, so that's the main thing we're going to be looking to fix in any of our kind of solo approaching decks. Now, his reliability is a little bit low, I've put here. That might confuse people, but in solo play especially, again, he's got cards like Enhanced Spider Sense, which is really good if you get a Treachery card, but if you don't draw a Treachery card, you can't use it. Similar with Spider Tracers, no minion, can't use it. What if your Alter Ego or the villain is stunned, backflip, can't use it. Lots of cards that if you draw at the wrong time or the wrong situation, they're just not great. And if you happen to get 3 or 4 of them and maybe a resource card in your hand, you can just be stuck, which is quite a massive pain. But fortunately, Spider-Man is rich. His Alter Ego ability on Peter Parker generates a resource. We like resources. His hero ability, Spider Sense, is whenever he gets attacked, draw a card. So he's got a lot more card draw than usual. He's got good resource generation. So we can use this economy, the way he pays and gets cards, to fix his other problems by paying for aspect cards which solve them. And that is going to be one of our major strategies here in general. And then he's just good at surviving. He's got that 3 defense, backflip, one of the best defense cards in the game. Aunt May, one of the best healing support cards in the game. Webbed up. The problem with Webbed Up, it stops 2 attacks. Again, in solo play, that means you're getting 2 less cards because the villain's not attacking you twice. Your hero ability is offline for 2 turns, pretty much, which is, it just makes Webbed Up too expensive to play, in my opinion, outside of, kind of like emergencies, or like you've got absolutely nothing else to do with your entire hand, which, again, that's sort of the reliability problem in a nutshell. So, Web Warriors. He doesn't have Web Warrior printed on him, even though he is Spider-Man, the kind of, the Web Warrior in my opinion. But I kind of have come to terms with this. The thing is, Web Warriors are really strong, guys, like ridiculously strong. By having to play like Warrior of the Great Web or Web of Life and Destiny first before I can play allies like Ghost Spider that need you to have a Web Warrior card in play before you can play them, it makes them feel earned. It makes that power level feel like, you really had to fight for it. And I like that. So actually, I think it's kind of fun as long as you don't kind of think about what could have been and you kind of accept what is. And that brings me on to my first deck. Welcome to the Web Warriors 2. Welcome to the Web Warriors was a deck I posted with War of the Great Web before Spider-Man, and it was pretty popular, relatively. But this is a slightly revised version. It has a lower ceiling, so if everything lines up perfectly, the other deck will do a little bit better. But this one is a little bit more consistent. Your worst turn, your worst game is actually going to look, not half as bad. So it's got a lot more consistency to it. And the idea is we've got threat removal cards like Clear the Area. We've got Stealth Strike, a bit of damage for that mid-range minion clearance. And that's really just to kind of clear the way and keep the game running until the Web Warrior engine is fully online. We're running triple War of the Great Web. We've also got the Justice Spider-Man, which you can play without having another Web Warrior in play, Web of Life and Destiny. So we've got lots of different ways we can get Web Warriors online and able to play them, which is what we want. And once that's going, it's just card draw galore. It's very, very satisfying, very, very fun. And I just think it works really well. We're literally just taking Spider-Man at his base level, saying, hey, his fording's not good, let's put him in Justice. Hey, Web Warriors are really good, let's get some of those, they've got good damage as well. Stealth Strike, not the most popular card, but we're kind of looking at it being a little bit inefficient, but then Spider-Man having lots and lots of resources, and it kind of balances out. Not the most efficient option, but it is a very safe and consistent option that he can afford anyway. So I like this deck. It's not going to win any points of creativity on this one, but it does work very well in my opinion and is designed for solo play, although I think it does do quite well in 2-player as well. Then we have Voltron Quintet, and this can be played at any player count, this one. I'd say it's slightly better at 2 to 4, but it's still fine on 1 player, especially against some of the more forgiving, like slightly slower paced villains at the beginning, because this takes a couple of turns to really get going. But if you guys don't know what Voltron is, it's when you take basically an ally and you slap a bunch of upgrades onto it, and it's effectively kind of like, a second hero kind of thing. Now, I think the term has been muddied and, loosened a bit over the years because it's become more popular to run a couple of Voltron targets or, maybe just run a few key upgrades, and it's kind of just upgrade leadership in a way. But here we are trying to build up some really big, juicy allies. And what makes this deck different to most of the decks I see out there is that we are bringing 5 Voltron targets, not just 1 or 2, not just maybe 3, not just running lots of core for 8 to try and get them. We have 5 different allies that are all really good to, Voltron up, to stack with upgrades. And that makes it really, really consistent. But this isn't talked about much of decks, but it also has a lot of replayability. Depending on which of these you draw first, you're going to set them up differently. You're going to have very different allies to use throughout the rest of the game, because once they're down and set up, you're using those allies. Those are kind of what you're basing your game around. So it's just got that different, experience every time you play it. But still, by having 5 of them and 1 copy of Call for Aid, we have a very, very consistent way to get a Voltron target. Call for Aid, of course, finding an Avenger. We have 2 of them here that are really well suited to have upgrades on them. And you can kind of think of the Voltron targets as being split into 2 camps. And this is important because ideally this deck actually wants 2 Voltron allies in play. We're pretty greedy here. We're using Spider-Man's money and we're going for it. We're not worrying about resource generators. Our ramping is our allies. So we have Black Cat and Yondu being kind of the infinite attackers. They have a 1 attack stat, which is pretty rubbish, but they do not take consequential damage when they attack. This means they can attack and attack and attack, turn after turn, ready them up as much as you like, and they will be just fine. That's really, really good. On the other hand, we've then got Ronin and Iron Man, who are the kind of the, the bruisers coming in with more attack and forwarding. Their baseline stats are better, but they take consequential damage when they attack and so on. So they are characters that you have limited use of, and then you need to heal them up. So we kind of want to split our targets like this. We want 1 Voltron target who doesn't take attacking consequential damage, and then 1 who does. And we'll focus our healing on that 1 who does, and we'll just let the other one keep going with less stats, but, no maintenance, basically. So that's kind of the divide. We're looking for 1 of each. But then we've got that 5th one. We've got Deadpool, who is really in the middle. He's like the perfect hybrid to fill in either of these roles that you lack, because Deadpool takes consequential damage, but what he doesn't do is get defeated when he basically would be defeated by consequential damage. So if you use up his last hit point on an attack, he comes straight back to life. He heals up, and as a consequence of sorts, instead, you get a acceleration token. Now, you have to play carefully around the acceleration token. If you just go for it straight away turn 1, you might be in for a very bad time. This is not a super fast-paced deck, but if you kind of heal him up or kind of use him cautiously for the first few turns, there comes a point where you can just start to just use him like crazy as if he was Black Cat or Yondu, which makes him a really interesting kind of point in the middle. You're like, okay, I'll focus my healing on Iron Man or Ronin if I've got them in play, and then Deadpool, I can just kind of just let him go. And these characters, when fully upgraded with Inspired, Power Glove, Sidearm, they're going to be doing, 4 to 6 damage, which is really, really good. So they pack a punch, and with things like Command Team, Inspiring Presence, we're going to get a lot of attacks out of them. Sky Cycle as well. We want Honorary Avenger on basically anyone who's not already an Avenger, and even if they are, we can throw it on. And even though these are all kind of Voltron allies, Ronin, Deadpool, and Black Cat are perfectly playable and usable if you don't put a single upgrade on them. Ronin maybe hits a little bit less efficiency than you'd really like, but it's still honestly very playable. So once you've got your 2 Voltron things kind of going, you can still play another ally. Use them to help defend. Maybe if your multiplayer helps defend someone else, if you're fine as Peter Parker, so on and so forth. But it's still playable, still get good use out of them. And then you've got these monstrous allies readying lots and lots. And you're just Spider-Man doing Spider-Man things alongside it. Spider-Man has good card draw. You're going to get your first aid a little bit quicker back than usual, which is pretty nice. We could also potentially run here United We Stand, especially for expert mode. There are different options. You could go call for backup if someone will help you fort to help get a Voltron ally in play. But I quite like this balance. I like going all in on the upgrades and the Voltron allies and just letting it rip. And I think it's very, very fun. Now, word of caution, there is a small chance you don't get your Voltron ally for a couple of turns, and that slows down the deck immeasurably. So the risk in the first one is you've got to set up those Red Warriors. The risk in this one, you've got to set up your Voltron target. But with 5 targets and 1 copy of Call for Aid, which, finds an Avenger, it is pretty consistent. It's quite rare. I feel like I get one turn 1 at least 80% of the time. Honestly, it feels like a bit more, and I definitely turn 2. It's very unlikely to go any further than that without seeing one. Oh, and before we move on, something I realized I should have mentioned, this is a 44 card deck. Just do it. It's no one's going to come along and police you say, oh, you should be playing a 40 card deck. Spider-Man has a lot of those awkward cards. So while this deck is, slightly unreliable in that, yeah, you've got to get that Voltron ally set up, we do have 6 targets. And by thinning out the deck, otherwise, we are making sure we're still getting one of those Voltron allies. That's why I've got so many of them. But we're not getting so many of the awkward cards kind of together so much. And it's going to space out the upgrades that little bit more, which is really, really nice. And let's take them. And once the upgrades are out, our deck is thinned out and we still have a very kind of tight, smooth running deck. Once you're set up, you just carry the game. So very fun. I enjoy this one a lot. Even if leadership web is much stronger or, recursion, Maria Hill, things like that. Then we've got Thwip and Quip. Now, I couldn't fit Thwip into this deck. It is a very fun web warrior kind of card that stuns the enemy, but it's not really good because we don't want to stun the enemy here. We want the enemy to attack us, so we draw cards with our Spider Sense ability. But Thwip is the kind of sound he makes, Spider-Man makes, when he shoots webs. So I'm keeping it in the name. And his quips are kind of his taunts. That's how we're getting a massive card draw here, which is what this deck is all about. This deck could work in 2-player, but this deck is more of a kind of 1-player kind of themed deck. That's what I kind of aimed for when I built this originally, and I really like it. Taunt and Spider-Man is kind of a combo that's been talked about a lot recently. It's a new card Taunt that came with Angel. Very, very fun. You pay it for 1 cost, and then the villain attacks you, but after they attack you, you get to draw 3 cards. As your Spider-Man, you basically get a 4th card, which actually comes first before the attack concludes, but it's really, really good for Spider-Man with that extra card. Now, the problem I see with most of these decks is that they run a lot of defense cards. They're like, oh, I'm going to make the enemy attack me again, so I need to be able to deal with their attack, again. But the problem to me is if I'm drawing cards with Taunt, apart from that first one, because it comes before the actual attack, I don't want my 3 cards afterwards to be defense cards, but if I'm stacking up defense cards to be attacked a lot, that's what I'm going to get. Well, that's why this card absolutely gets away with them. It adds the absolute minimal events really necessary. It just has a way to, across the Spider-Verse to get those Web Warriors in play, because this is a Web Warrior deck again. But generally, everything you draw from Taunt is going to be playable and usable that turn. Even if it's Energy Barrier, you're setting up for next turn. This deck uses Energy Barrier and Armored Vest to trigger Unflappable on things. It doesn't care about defense events outside of Backflip, and it does use Jocasta to try and get a 3rd copy of that throughout the game. So I think it's very good. The basic strategy is get, your Warrior of the Great Web down / Web of Life and Destiny / both of them, so you can play your Web Warrior allies. And we have limited ourselves to 4 Web Warrior allies and Silk, even though we could have more. And I kind of put Silk separately because you can actually play her without a Web Warrior out. So she's kind of an extra way to get a Web Warrior card in play to let you and it play your other Web Warrior allies. We've then got Daredevil, and I sort of mentioned Jocasta as well, who kind of are just options to play alongside Black Cat when you haven't got your Web Warrior stuff set up, but they are still good anyway because Jocasta getting Backflip, super strong. Daredevil, he's just 2 forwarding, and you can even fort twice with him for kind of a slow version of For Justice, same cost as For Justice, same threat removal in the end. Slower, but you can divide it. Long story short, Daredevil helps Spider-Man with his threat problem until the kind of Web Warrior machine is rolling, and then you're good to go. The Taunt strategy is like this. You basically want 1 or 2 allies out going into the villain phase, and when the villain attacks you, if you have Taunt in hand, you block with a ally instead. This is so on your turn, when you use Taunt, you're not exhausted, and you can exhaust with Spider-Man to defend the Taunt attack, because allies cannot block attacks from Taunt. When you taunt the villain, they come directly for your hero, no matter what. So you kind of want to block the villain's attack in the villain phase, so you can be the one to block it in the hero phase, because no one else is going to do it for you. And we don't have like defense events to ready up and things here. We don't care about that. And this works out really well. When the villain first attacks us, we will get that card drawn from Spider Sense, then an ally blocks, whatever. Then we taunt again, we get another card from Spider Sense, and any of these cards could be Backflip as well, which is going to be really nice for us too. So it just works out really smoothly. Whatever you draw, you're probably going to be able to play it, unless, you happen to get Spider Tracer and there's no minions out, but Peter Parker isn't getting away from that anytime soon. So yeah, it's kind of perfect defense meets Taunt meets Web Warriors, kind of a perfect hybrid, and I just find for Taunt Spider-Man, this is the version I found the best. Now, if you're in like 3 or 4 player, especially, and you need to defend for lots and lots of people, obviously this isn't going to do it. This is, again, designed for solo. I still think it does 1 and 2 player, and it's very, very fun. And that about does it. If you guys have any favorite decks for Spider-Man, let me know in the comments. If you guys try any of the decks in this video, definitely please let me know. I'd be really, really interested in that. That sounds really cool. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. There'll be lots more like this coming up, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.